Hello and welcome to the fourth live talk show of GlowComNet, portal of Global Complexity Network. My name is Connie Dorsten and I'm your host today. This broadcast is part of a series of 6 monthly broadcasting programs around the theme of complexity. These programs, and thus these broadcasts, are interactive, which means you can join us by active participation. By sending an email to info@glowcomnet.com, you can reach the editor immediately, who will then try to get your question to the table. We remind you in advance that the number of sign-in viewers suggests that many questions are to be expected, and it may be that your response is not addressed. In that case, we will try to reach you in a different way after the broadcast with a response. Today we're talking about personal development, and joining me are Professor Lex Hoogduin, University of Groningen, and Sujata De Pol, a career consultant on personal development and a former trainer and coach at the University of Groningen. And for all clarity, we have agreed to address each other by first name. Welcome. In previous episodes, we talked about how companies can learn to deal with complexity and uncertainty. Today we go to the other extreme, the micro level. You, me, us. Nothing changes without human impact, and that does not start with a corporation or team, but with each individual using his or her creativity, mental DNA, experience and instincts to deal with this very complex environment. Today's broadcast is also a perfect setup for our next episode on storytelling. So listen to Lex and Sujata on how they made choices in their life, dealt with good and bad luck, and are still doing so every day. The stories will give you hooks for your own life, but there's more. There are skills you can develop to survive or even thrive on uncertainty. Point your ears, let's go. So, Sujata, I'm going to start with you because you really intrigued me because you have this beautiful Indian first name and then there's the De Pol, which sounds distinctly Dutch. Give us a bit of background.
Thank you, Connie. You're right. My first name is indeed Indian. I come from Kerala, which is in the south of India. It's a very beautiful state by the sea. Yeah. And I met my Dutch husband in India about 30 years ago. And we've raised 5 children. They're all adults and young professionals now. And I've lived and worked in India, in the Indian subcontinent, in Asia, in the Middle East, and now in Europe. And I'm really fascinated by the topic of personal development, and I would say that I am very passionate about helping others find and achieve their highest potential.
Fantastic. And so then Lex, on the other extreme, I mean, we and the viewers know you as an economist, so you would think that's a person who really much rather deals with large, complex issues and numbers. What is your connection to the personal development topic?
Born in the Polder, born in the Netherlands, and only lived 4 years abroad. So it's completely different, and still arriving then at a similar topic. Yeah. To be fascinated by the similar topic. My approach to and my road to personal development go through uncertainty, go through complexity, but more in particular. Uncertainty, a topic that I dealt with at the university also some 30 years ago. That started at that time, and what I learned when I started to study complexity and uncertainty in particular, is that uncertainty is a fundamental part of the human condition, and we cannot predict the future. We have to cope with it, and basically the core of living, not only of companies but of persons in particular, is how do you cope with that in an environment where you cannot predict. So you cannot plan anything in advance in detail. So life is developing. Yeah. A personal life is personal development, and that's how I arrived at it. And I was surprised myself that I would find myself focusing on this topic 30 years later, being a classical economist.
It is, because sometimes some people view it as like a soft skill, but it's not at all, is it actually? Personal development is not a soft study or a soft subject.
No, it's not soft. It's not soft at all. As I said, it's the core of life. It's you cannot program your own life. I think that's the big difference between a person and a computer.
Yeah.
That's also the difference between, let's say, artificial intelligence and a real person.
Yeah.
Right.
do you, just one question, because you lived in so many countries. Do you think that this whole drive that at one point came about, this drive towards certainty, that it had to do also with the, prosperity and seeking certainty goes hand in hand? Do you see that people in other cultures are actually much better at dealing with uncertainty than we have become in the West?
That's really an interesting question. I would say that it plays out to the same extent that it plays out here. I think it's because the future is where we're all going, and the environment that we're in is something that affects not just us here, but everyone globally, the uncertainty. And to add to this point, I've just recently read the Gallup's 2017 research on workplace environments. And what they've discovered is that motivation is at an all-time low in the workplace. People spend most of their lives in the workplace.
Yes.
And it's quite shocking, actually. It shows that only 15% of employees worldwide are actually engaged, which means a stunning 85% of employees are disengaged. So what Gallup has discovered is that the biggest reason is a failure for organizations to be able to adapt to this uncertain and complex environment that's happening so rapidly. And what I see as a solution to this is actually to build strength-based organizations, and to be able to engage more with employee strengths and to build on that, because employees are really looking for that at work. They're looking for motivation, they're looking for purpose.
Purpose, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's very
I do-
disconcerting to hear that.
It is.
Yeah, no, but I do think the cultural aspect is really interesting. I'm deeply convinced that, let's say, with grappling with uncertainty is part of the human condition and is independent of any culture. Well, at the same time, there's a very large part of diversity at the same time. We all grapple with the same point, that we cannot know what will happen in the future, whether you are in Asia, in Africa, wherever.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, let's move on then to the next topic, because bearing in mind that we're all more or less the same, I think, age. But you both work at universities. You worked at university, so you have a lot of have had a lot of exposure to students, and career planning. We have a lot of viewers who are students, and career planning is a big topic. And when I was young, career planning was easy. Your parents told you to find a safe job. Basically for a girl, if you became a nurse or a teacher, and you married an accountant or a banker, you were set for life. And I don't think it's really I never thought it was the recipe, by the way, but. How should people go about career planning now?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think the first point would be that the main difference between then and now is that careers are no longer following a straight trajectory. In other words, they're not linear anymore. They don't even look like a pathway. They look more like a maze.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So navigating a maze requires a whole different skill set than navigating a straight trajectory. And it's exactly what you said. My father was a banker for 30 years and he did nothing else. And he just moved up within the banking sector. Whereas now I think that millennials and all of us really need to develop a different skill set, which includes adaptability and resilience. And it's more like we're looking at shooting moving targets rather than target that's standing still. So that's a huge difference. The other thing is to understand millennials better, and I think that organizations need to gear up a bit more towards understanding millennials and what their needs and desires actually are. So when millennials are asked, what they're saying is they really want to work more with development and with growth and with strengths. They want to have coaching conversations in the workplace. And interestingly, they want to work with what they do best, which is actually a strength-based approach. So they want to do what they're best at,
yes,
which is actually part of the solution.
Yeah.
So these are some of the differences. Another thing is that they face massive competition. So it's no longer about having a degree or having good grades. It's about differentiation. So that's a challenge they face. I would say, to sum up, that both us, our generation, as well as the millennial generation, really needs to develop a new skill set that is going to equip us better to face an uncertain future.
Yeah. And so, Alex, how do you feel about these sort of programs or directions that even like governments give and say, oh, the next generation, I mean, this or that, you should study this? I mean, do you think that other bodies like government or whatever should get involved with initiatives to steer people towards a particular workplace?
No, I don't think so, and I think that's that's dangerous in a way, because governments and government officials do not know more about what's good for you. They know less actually, and going in a direction that they also cannot predict can easily lead you to go in the wrong direction, makes you vulnerable. So I think the core thing that you need to do is to take your life, your career in your own hands. It's your own responsibility, and that's on the one hand a burden, but it's on the other hand that's the opportunity to develop your own career, to develop your own life. So let's not no longer speak about career planning, but career development, career growth, and so on.
And do you see that companies are open to this perspective? Because companies often have these like trainee classes where they want to get the top talent and then grow and breed it so it stays with them forever and builds up at the next level of management. Do you see that companies are actually open to this idea that they might actually train and coach students who will leave them after 5 years?
Well, that's a good thing that you asked that. So I think a lot of this is where the change needs to come in, I think, within organizations, and what I referred to before in building up strength-based organizations, which means that when you look at the entire organization, they're working with strengths. So the leaders are working with their strengths, and then they're also supporting employees, graduates, etc., in working with their strengths. I don't think that's actually quite in place yet in most organizations. No. And I think that's really what's needed, and that's what's missing. So I think performance review conversations, for example, which you brought up earlier when we were having tea, is extremely relevant. So I think performance reviews and the whole career trajectory needs to be much more aligned with what are the strengths of this unique individual that's sitting in front of me? What are they really, really good at doing? And what are they perhaps not so good at doing? So what you're not so good at doing is not really a weakness. So this whole model that Lex and I are working with it's more a strength-based model, which is let's look at what is strong rather than what's wrong. And I think that's what needs to change within organizations.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Well, we're going to talk about that in depth in a minute. So if we agree that the outlook has changed, I think people's expectations have changed as well. We see it ourselves with our children. They have a totally different outlook on work. But also people who come into the labour market again because they've lost their job or they're in their 50s and there's no longer a need for what they do now. Yeah. So all of us need different skills. So rather than just planning and then the plan goes wrong and you're in dire straits, you talk to us, to me about that it's much more important to be alert. How can you point that? How can you give us some guidance on that? What can people do to be alert?
Well, I think you can do a number of things. The first of all, it is to not follow a pre-planned sort of get stuck in a specific trajectory, because when you do that, essentially what you're doing is you're like a horse with blinkers. You're not able to see the bigger picture around you. So for example, you might be sitting on a flight next to somebody who's actually the architect of your future, of what you want. Yeah. But because you're in this siloed sort of vision where you think, oh, I've got this job and then I'm going to move from A to B in this particular way, you're not engaging with that person or being open to new opportunities. So I think being alert essentially means really being alert to the signals around you. What are the new opportunities? What's going on? Which area can I develop myself in more? What do I want to go towards? Asking yourself these questions all the time and being open. Yeah. I think that's the main point.
Curious.
Yeah, absolutely.
So curiosity does not kill the cat. It's very
Definitely
good for
not.
this cat.
Yeah,
good.
It's very healthy.
No, so you must accept. I think the most important thing is that we accept that we will be surprised. We cannot plan everything in advance. There's always room for potential surprise. And that immediately leads alertness to be necessary. Yeah. Because what is alertness basically is to be able to detect surprises and to look for surprises. And surprises can be positive ones, so opportunities, but can also be negative ones, and it starts with that attitude. Yeah. Being aware that you will be surprised, however well you try to plan things and give up the idea, the illusion of being able to create certainty. I think that's the most important thing, and then the rest follows from that.
Yeah. But if I may be so frank, if we look at your own career, you know, you've sailed very close, and you are, you have a number of very influential positions, and you look back to where you started. I mean, did you plan for any of this?
No, with hindsight, hardly. I would say at best. At best, to start it already with, why did I start to study economics? That was more or less a good accident. I must say, I was in high school. I was very good at the beta courses. So I initially wanted to study mathematics. I didn't follow any economics courses, for instance. Wow. So then all of a sudden I found a booklet on Keynes and modern economics, and then I thought, let's do that spontaneously within 30 seconds. So that's how more or less it went. So my approach always has been, without having thought about it like I do now, but my approach was always focus on what you're going to do now, do it as well as you can, enjoy it, find energy in it, and be open to what happens and see what happens. You can never know. And so over time I had many situations where I, because of being alert, had new opportunities and moved into these new opportunities. I've never planned that, and I've seen people trying to plan that, and not in a few cases people became very frustrated, because you cannot plan something 5-10 years ahead. You don't focus on the present. All things will happen that will derail your plan, and you become very frustrated.
Well, we talked about this before as well. It creates an incredible level of anxiety if you feel you always have to focus on this massive goal that sometimes even seems untenable. So I think that's very good advice.
If I could just add a tiny example.
Please do.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't resist. Alertness. So an example from my own life, if I can, really quick, is when I lived and worked in Syria, there was a border bombing, and the institution that I worked in was shut down overnight because of political reasons. And overnight I was out of a job. So I also realized that there was an opportunity here, because the international school was shut down exactly the same time. And here was I looking for work, and here were a bunch of hundreds of parents whose children didn't have a school to go to. So I connected with the parents, and within a week we had a school up and running in the home of one of the parents. So here's a simple example of how you can use your alertness and your adaptable skills to actually create opportunity out of disorder. So
perfect.
Yeah, and that is something that you could never have planned in advance.
It
was a complete black swan event.
We'll when we come to the model, because there's something about having an entrepreneurial attitude as well. I do want to come back slightly to this culture thing, because I travel a lot and I work in other places. And if you talk about career planning, etc., sometimes other people put great emphasis on your career, which is dangerous, because if the career is gone, suddenly you're nobody. That's seriously dangerous. But also, in many cultures, failure is totally acceptable, because at least you've tried. Whereas in the Western world, we're not too keen on failure. We rather sort of polish it away or leave it off the CV. Have you got any perspectives on that?
Absolutely. Failure, yes. The perceptions of failure are so different, how they're perceived and how they're handled. So you talked about, for example, the US. So in the Silicon Valley, I mean, no one's going to invest in you unless you failed 2-3 times and you've learned your lessons, right? So scars on your back. So that's really something great. Whereas in other cultures, for example, even in Western Europe, it's taken as something personal. Or in the East, for example, in India or in the Far East, I think it's even more strong, the culture of saving face, reputation, harmony is more desirable, shame, what are people going to say? And we all remember the sad stories of what happened in South Korea when the crash happened there some years ago, where executives actually, didn't even want to go home, when they realized they'd lost their job. They just get dressed up in a suit and go and sit in the park all day, because that was better than saying I'd failed, or worse yet, jump off the top of a building. So yes, but I do think that we really need to change our thinking about failure, because wrapped up within failure is actually the stepping stones to success. You know, learning about failure is actually what leads you to success. So we need a much more compassionate and a more human view on that. And it's also inconsistent with life, right? If you're not allowed to fail, then you're not living, isn't it? So, for example,
very bland.
yeah, you know, like Dutch children who learn, when we teach our children how to ride a bike, we're not, you know, reprimanding them every time they fall off, but we're saying, fantastic, you learn how to ride a bike, that's great, keep trying. You know, and Edison, who failed thousands of times inventing the light bulb, he said, well, I know 1,000 different ways how not to do it.
Yeah.
You know, or Henry Ford said, a failure is just a fantastic opportunity to start again, this time more intelligently. So that's how I see it. Yeah.
And so we talked about success and failure. Then there's the other aspect that I want to address before we go slightly more into a structured mode. And that's something that we all spoke about as well. And it's the idea of good and bad luck. And there's people set out to do great endeavors, and a spell of bad luck can take, well, you know, if you're a competitive sportsman, you know, a millisecond makes all the difference. Yeah. How do you best deal in life with both good and bad luck, and can you influence it? Because it seems as if you can't.
Yeah, this is really a key point. So if we relate good and bad luck to surprises, which I think is a similar way of saying it. So everybody will be open to good luck and bad luck, and that's inevitable. And so what you can do is to blame it, and if you have bad luck, blame it on the bad luck. But I do think life is not that bad. In a way that you can, as Sujata I think explained a minute ago, the issue is how do you deal with it? First, be detected. But let's take the example of bad luck. Then the question is, how do you deal with it? Do you see it as an opportunity to learn from it, and then to benefit from it, or do you ignore it, and then it doesn't help you. So I think that there's a very interesting book, Great by Choice, by Jim Collins and another author, in which they also discuss this issue in depth. And investigate whether, let's say, the success of companies, they apply to companies, but you could equally well apply to persons.
It's your own life.
Yeah, to your own life, and I think it applies there as well. They investigate whether let's say, companies that thrived had more good luck and less bad luck than companies that didn't thrive so well. The answer is no. It's not the case. So it's far more decisive of how you deal with good and bad luck, rather than whether you
when
have
it comes your way.
Yeah, and I think and they even call it. I find it a very nice way of putting it. What you have to try to maximize is your return on luck. Good and bad luck. Right. In our terminology return on luck. In our terminology, it is you have to detect the surprises, good and bad surprises. And you have to have the strength and the capabilities then to leverage that, to benefit from it, or let's say to protect the downside. And that's basically, if you say what is the art of dealing with uncertainty, is being able to cope with surprises, let them not kill you, and create situations that you actually benefit from them. For instance, your very nice example earlier showed.
Yeah. About the school in Syria, you mean?
Yeah,
yes, absolutely. Yeah. So you made the point now. I mean, we talked about certain sort of areas of influence around this whole personal development. So, and we have had some fantastic pre-discussions, where, as I said, like, well, but in how far can you actually train or adapt to become more skilled at dealing with life? Is it not something like somebody's more versatile than the other?
Right.
And you very validly made the point, well, we wouldn't want to be able to reset people and make them all the same. But you can learn skills. And so I think it's very important that we're now going to go into a sort of slightly more structured project, and we have a little bit more time. So we're going to look at a number of trends that really are key to developing personal skills for, success is almost the wrong word, isn't it? To become who you should or want to be. So I'm going to ask you to talk to each of those trends and then give a few examples. So let's start. First skill set in the model is all about being entrepreneurial. Does everybody need an entrepreneurial skill?
Yeah.
You know, what if you're a nurse?
Yeah. So first of all, first a general remark. Indeed, let's say our model is a model that helps you to be effective in the world as it is, complex and uncertain. And it says you will be helped by developing six strengths, and one of them is being entrepreneurial. And here I think we have to be aware that the word entrepreneur is in normal language is closely linked to running an enterprise.
Business,
a business. And certainly if you run a business, this is a key requirement. But I think it is useful to make a distinction between entrepreneurial and being entrepreneurial and being an enterpriser. Enterpriser is somebody who runs a business, and that person certainly must be entrepreneurial. But we define it in a far more general context. And entrepreneurial in our case is basically that you have the capacity to act autonomously as an individual, as a human being, independently, having personal responsibility for your own life, pursuing your own objectives, happiness, whatever you want to pursue. And that's basically what people are doing. What is a human being that is not too much restricted. So the answer to your question then is not does everybody need it? It is what everybody is in the end, unless you are a slave or performing a function that's purely automatic. You referred, I think you said, should everybody have it in the same context? A nurse.
Yeah.
Well, you could say, why doesn't a nurse need it? I do think, if you think deeper, if a nurse wouldn't need it, we could replace a nurse by a robot. And perhaps for certain things we can. But I do think there's something missing then in the personal touch, the personal values, the personal care, the personal interpretation of what is happening with the other human being, the personal responsibility also for the other person, the personal values that you bring in, the personal, let's say, purpose, as we discussed earlier. So entrepreneurial behavior is everywhere, and I think what is important that our people are aware of it and articulate it. And I think what we have seen in many Western societies, because of the development of the welfare state, is that the element of seeing yourself as an individual that is sovereign in a way, and that's the ultimate unit of action.
Yes.
That has faded, and we think that the state in this case has to take care of us. And I think that has undermined the entrepreneurial capacity in Western states.
You're sounding like Mr. Dalrymple.
Yeah, so he is referring to an element of that, and as said, it is particularly the case in the big welfare states, because it's often taken that this entrepreneurial approach and taking the individual, let's say, as the ultimate unit, as the king or a queen of his own life, leads to egoism. But that's a mistake. It's not egoism. It is perfectly possible and even likely that every person should realize that he should be very humble, that he knows very little, and that he is dependent on other persons. So also in this approach is very clearly that you should be aware that cooperation is key, and self-interest is not egoism.
Yeah.
And I would even go further that let's say in welfare states, by eroding individual responsibility, have undermined real solidarity and real care for other persons.
Because you actually become a better team player.
And also in the area that we mentioned as an example, being a nurse in healthcare, by running that, let's say, from a state perspective, and focusing very much on managerial aspects of
processes.
Processes. It undermines the idea of the in this case the nurse taking care of the patient and the other human being. It dehumanizes, let's say, society and human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. I can really relate to what Lex just said, especially from my experience of having lived and worked in lots of countries which were not welfare states. And comparing that with my experience of living here in the Netherlands, the first stark contrast that I actually saw was indeed exactly what Lex mentioned, is this dependency on the state.
Yeah.
And why do I need to have a chat with you, my neighbor Connie, just say, hoi, hoe gaat het, mooi weer? And then I don't really need you further than that, because when I need something, I'll just go to the government, to the gemeente, for there's een potje for this and een potje for that. So what it is actually really about is seeing that people in other countries where there isn't the government waiting to support them, how strong their societies actually are, how much they support each other and care for each other, as Lex just said. And if person A doesn't have a job, he's just going to go to his uncle's bakery and work there until he finds something else, because there simply isn't that sort of support system. So when push comes to shove, when it comes to the crunch, it remains to be seen whether it's the Western societies that will still stay strong. And I think it's not the case. They're quite fragile. When all the support falls away, how much are we there to be able to support each other? And that's when individual agency, as Lex said, comes in, taking responsibility for our own lives and being an active agent and being able to act in that way.
It is so telling, because as you're telling me this, I have had mentoring little girls in Kenya. And my last mentee is now 15, 16, and she said, she was needed at home because her sister had a baby. And so could you step out of the program? But we know what happens, they never come back. So I said, if you finish your education, you finish the program, you can take care of 3 people. Because it's a known fact, I'm not an economist, but I think, every strong woman who has a job and is healthy can take care of at least 3 other individuals. And already there as well, you see this whole thing like be entrepreneurial about it, find another solution to that problem, but you stay on your course. And then you can take care of more people. And it's a foundation. I actually think we should teach our children that much earlier in life, rather than chauffeur them to school every day. But that's a different topic.
For the next one.
That's for the next one. And then next, as one of the skills or trends to watch, is about being alert. We talked about it briefly. I would like you both to explain this to me, but also to point to me, what does alert mean? I mean, alert means you pick up signs, but we're living in a society with an overload of information. We're constantly receiving signals and signs. And so how can we filter out what's relevant in being alert? So I'd like you to sort of touch on that as well.
Yeah, so first of all, it's an attitude. I think we discussed that already a bit, but the most important thing is an attitude. Being alert, being curious, wanting to know, being on the alert for opportunities, being on the alert for threats. I think that's the first thing. Then the second thing is that you're absolutely right. The reflex is often try to get as much information as possible, and that doesn't work. I can give you one example. A big Dutch bank. I had a workshop with them, and I asked them, what kind of information did we already discuss? I asked them what kind of information you gather. They were the supervisors, board of supervisors. What kind of information do you need to be able to do your job? They said, well, we can skip this topic more or less, because we receive every quarter 400 pages management information. So I said, okay, that's fine. What do you do with it? And basically the answer was nothing, because how can you do it? So
It's too much.
So saying alert, first of all, it's attitude, but then secondly, you need the right way to zoom in and zoom out, as it were, and you need different approaches. First of all, you have to think yourself, given what you are trying to achieve, what for you are the areas where you feel that the most uncertain developments may pop up. You never know, but you may have a feel that some things are more important than others. So you focus on these areas and you look at all the information through that perspective. To give an example, a couple of years ago we had the euro area crisis. Yeah. For me, there were two. There was basically one key uncertainty that I found useful in thinking about how should I be alert, and that was whether we would get a development where we would further integrate, or we would disintegrate. So I looked at all the signals through that lens, and I started to look for things that could tell me about in which way we were developing, because that was relevant for the thing that I that
you need to have on your radar at that moment in time.
Yeah, that affected me. So I think linking, let's say, your alertness to the topic that we discussed last time, the scenarios that you have and the uncertainties in the scenarios, I think is a great tool for being alert. Then another one is, and that's more company-wise, is that you use all the information and experience and emotions that are available in your company or in your team. Go directly to the persons in your team. Let's focus on a team, and ask them their experiences. And do not only look at it from the top. You miss a lot of information there. So you need. You need that input. There are other techniques, but it requires first the attitude, and then also think about how to do it, and that goes even to the technical infrastructure. In the end, what kind of an IT system do you need, and how do you also ensure that you have the right culture if you talk about groups? Because one of the difficult things is that you get people to report to you bad news.
Yeah.
Good news is never a problem, but bad news is always a problem. And in some cultures, some environments, it's very difficult to report bad news. Governments are a prime example there.
Oh, you lose your head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Simple.
So it's So 80. I always say, without having based that on statistics, but 80% of the civil servants are working on showing that the policy that was implemented was a good policy. Yeah. Even if that's not the case.
Even if it wasn't. Yeah. So, okay. And would you agree that I find that if I want to have at least some focus as well, and it doesn't need to be the opposite of alert, I'm still very alert, but I can't be alert to new makeup and trends in technology at the same time. So I have sort of few key areas that I'm hyper alert for. Yeah. And then sometimes when I have to be, I also almost zoom out of other environments. Would that be a bad thing to do?
No, that's exactly. I think that's exactly if. But I meant you have to sometimes zoom out, but you have to. I think it's more important, given actual behavior that you see, that you zoom in and focus on the things that are relevant to you. And what is relevant to you, there's only one person who knows that. That's you. And that's, for instance, what you often see is that companies or asset managers try to invite somebody, an expert, who then tells them what the outlook for the world economy is or whatever. I think that's totally irrelevant. That's a waste of time. You should focus on what is relevant for your company and your situation.
Correct. Yeah. And it's almost like I would see it the way you see it as well, Connie. And what Lex has explained, I totally agree with both of you. It's more like having a filter that you can filter out what's relevant for you, which areas are important to you, which areas do you want to go towards. So it's about differentiating, I think, mainly between noise and real signals.
Yes,
I think that's how I would see it. Yeah, that's actually, I'm quoting Taleb from his book, Anti-Fragility.
No,
it's quite
that's a very good way of
putting it.
Yeah,
and that this is also, the world is so complex that this is also dynamic.
Yeah.
So you may have missed something in your original filters, and then you are surprised. And so, well, perhaps I have to focus more on topic X than I did in the past.
Yeah. So, which brings me to the next topic. Doing all that, one of the next trends that is very important is to be resilient.
Indeed.
The backbone.
Yeah.
I'd like to start with you on that one.
Okay. So resilience, it's a really exciting topic, a really interesting topic. There's a lot of research, quite a large body of literature that backs it up, actually. I can think of, for example, Angela Duckworth. She's done some very good, interesting research into what she calls grit, which is passion and perseverance, which is essentially building resilience. And she's discovered empirical scientific evidence that you can actually build resilience. And another person I think is going a bit further back into the war period is a psychologist by the name of Viktor Frankl. And he also has written some very good work about how he built resilience himself through very difficult concentration camps, peak times, etc. But building resilience I think it comes a bit more naturally, as you said earlier. These are skills and capacities that some people have a bit more naturally than others do, but that doesn't mean they can't be built up. For example, a fantastic example, I think, is how Dutch children get their education. They get on a bike through the rain, through the snow, through the sleet, through the sun, and I think it builds fantastic mental and physical resilience. And I think that's something that is continued to old age. There's health benefits as well. And then there's also another way you can build resilience, several ways. I think it's by how we react to challenges and difficulties. Do we want to run away from them? Do we want to embrace them? I think embracing uncertainty and embracing challenge is what builds resilience.
Yes.
So, getting a supportive environment, people you can talk to, it's like you don't go to the gym just once, right? You keep going back because you want to build that muscle, you want to build that resilience. And another example I could think of is via negativa, is taking something away. So if you're smoking a lot and you're obviously not in good shape, you're fragile, you want to build resilience, you just take it away. So sometimes the answer is quite simple on how you can become more resilient. And
it's actually a very good point.
Two things. First of all, I want to link it to my hobby.
To you going to the gym? No.
I used to, but I've stopped doing that. I'd like to link it to the uncertainty and let's say the key consequence of uncertainty, that you will be surprised. So how do we in this model define resiliency? That's the capacity to be able to cope with negative surprise, setbacks, and to remain vital after a negative surprise. So that's how we define resiliency in this context.
Yeah. And I actually think we talk a lot about this, and I think you've raised 5 children. My goodness, I'm still he's 23, I suppose I should call it ready. But I think in particular, not mollycoddling, and it's not it's not just for children; it's for all people. Mollycoddling makes people very weak, and do it sort of out of love, but it's not real love. It's easy. And as I always say, I believe in the model of tough love because it's the real love. And I always see it's a beautiful contradiction because right at the moment when young people are incredibly open to experimenting new things, daring stuff that we don't dare anymore, we sort of try to comfort them back into too easy a life. Whereas between, let's say, 15 and 22, 23, 25,
Absolutely.
they dare everything. So would you agree that that period in your life is very important to build up a certain level of resilience and we should let them loose a bit more?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think experience and experiential learning is the greatest teacher. And, trying to protect ourselves or our children too much doesn't always lead to them becoming stronger, but rather weaker. If we shut ourselves up in a sterile room, it's lovely, it's clean, we're away from the germs, we won't get ill, but as soon as we get out, we will. So,
Does this mean that we should move, in your view, from, let's say, stability, certainty, to resiliency? Because I think we have the same discussion at the level of a country even.
Absolutely.
Where traditionally there's a lot of discussion about stability, financial stability, for instance. Where I think, again, if you operate in a very uncertain environment, which you all do, it's far more important that you are resilient, that you are able to cope with it.
Exactly.
Than to rigidly hold on to certain patterns.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Isn't that the case?
Yeah, that is absolutely the case. It's much wiser, I would think, to build up strengths that can be used in any kind of situation, rather than this interventionism. I mean, basically, we're talking about interventionism versus freedom to sort of fall down and get up and get hurt and learn from it. So I think that
away with all these.
But I would say the resiliency part of it is indeed that you also try to build in some protection. That if you fail, that you do not fail because of things that you could have prepared for.
Very good.
And that you have you have to experiment. You have to be flexible. On the one hand, but you should be protected. So, for instance, don't change everything at the same time. So try to operate in a fail-safe way.
Good.
Of course, never ruling out that you will make mistakes and there will be surprises, and then you can cope with that.
But it's a very good point. Never change everything at the same time. It's like change job, husband, country, and whatever. It's a bit much.
Yeah, it's a bit much.
All in one go.
I would agree.
The next three elements that I'm going to talk about with you are there's some expected and some very new ones. I want to talk with you about creativity and how we should put that in the right context. And then anti-fragility, which is a rather new term. It came new to me as well. And then adaptability. So let's start with creativity. I mean, we can all have jokes about how wonderful it is to have a creative accountant. But in which context would you put creativity here for a fulfilling path of life?
Let me first say this is, of course, a very good. It's a good point. All the strengths that we are discussing are relevant in general, but are to a different degree for different jobs in different circumstances. I think one of the important things is that you develop a sensitivity for knowing which strength you should use in what situation. Being an accountant, or let me give an even more telling example, being an employee at air traffic control. I think the greatest strength that you will be asking there is not creativity. It would be more in the resiliency, area. So if you are a person whose strength lies in resiliency, yes, go into that area. If you are a very creative person, probably you wouldn't do that yourself. But one of the things that you then could learn is that indeed you should not do that. But even in, let's say, in jobs where the strengths, the required major strengths lie somewhere else, creativity is important, because without creativity, you will not never think about doing things in another way, and you will never be able to
but it's
develop.
about putting it.
You will not use your imagination. And I think one of the great capacities of the human brain is that we are able to imagine and to
I think that's a key word in this context.
Yeah, it's a key word, and that's important in everywhere. But to a certain, to a different degree. That's
so creativity is not just arts, but again, as well, I work a lot with programmers, and I think technical engineers need to be massively creative and imaginative. But it's a different style of.
But it's interesting. One of the things that sometimes can be very helpful to bring together people where the major strength is in creativity. People from the art world. Yeah. With people who have to use their creativity in other environments where they can learn what it means to be creative and to think out of the box and to imagine things and to for instance, if we again refer to scenario thinking, not just put a scenario in words, which is a possibility, but for instance. Put it in a picture.
Yeah,
exactly.
Try to imagine it.
Try to imagine it.
Yeah.
So let me, because I'm also interested, cautious of the time. Anti-fragility is a very new term to me. So maybe we should take a second more to just explain that properly in this context.
Yeah. So anti-fragility.
We all know what fragile means.
Yeah. Yeah, often, so this is a term that comes from Taleb. We already referred to him, who has written a book on anti-fragility. Usually, distinction is made between fragility, and then people often think that the opposite is being robust, being resilient.
Yeah, exactly.
And Taleb says no, that's not the case. So he defines anti-fragility. Put it now in my own words, a situation where you even thrive on turbulence, so you benefit from turbulence. So we have in our model and our approach, we indeed thought it is important to make a distinction between resiliency, what we just discussed, and anti-fragility. So we define it again, relating it to surprises. And then expanding a little bit, a situation in which a person, if we look at it on a personal basis, benefits from negative surprises and is able to turn turbulence into opportunity. Yeah. To benefit from turbulence.
Give me a nice example. Give me a fun example.
Well, a fun example. In the sports world, for instance. You often have, let's say, those persons who need conflict, turbulence, to get the best out of themselves. Yeah. For instance, the famous soccer player Johan Cruyff always was at his best when there was conflict, and he often, whether he did it consciously or unconsciously, he created conflicts before a great game, and then he got the best out of himself. And you can also see it in situations, for instance, in the Brexit case, now, which is turbulence, which is in a way
say the least.
Pressure. I think an anti-fragile person looks for the opportunity from that, from such a situation. Even if that situation initially puts him in is for him a bad news, he tries to turn it into good.
Well, and
news.
many great entrepreneurs we know have this as well. They thrive on it.
Yeah. And so these are people that thrive. Another way to putting it, thrive under pressure. Yeah. Somebody who's resilient is able to cope with it. This is what people really who need pressure. They love it and they need it, and they don't function without pressure almost.
That's a level I can relate to that. If I've got too much balance in my life, I become very lazy. Then finally, adaptability. And for me, that was a tough one. And I'm sure you can put it much better because it sounds so obvious and Darwinian. Of course, we have to be adaptable. But what would you say to people when you mentor them on this? How do you view it?
I think adaptability is one of the most important capacities to have in life. because on a daily basis we're put into situations where things don't always go as we expect it to. So you can look at it on a micro level and take it into a macro level, so small issues but also really large issues.
Yeah.
So being adaptable is extremely important, I think. In the workplace, we live in an increasingly diverse workplace, whether you're working at home or whether you're traveling abroad. In my case, I've lived and worked in a number of different countries, and I would say that the ability to adapt to the changing weather, all of a sudden you drive into Damascus and it's 48 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
You know, I thought, oh, I'll just open the window for some air, and it's like a giant hairdryer blowing into your face. So adapting to cultures, to climates, to languages, learning to make relationships that are different to what you're used to, understanding what trust means in another culture. Working in a different country.
And how can we best develop that skill? Is it pure exposure to lots of different things, or can you also teach yourself?
Well, I think it's both. I think it's an attitude. It's a state of mind. You know, how open do I want to be? You know, do I want to stick to the known and what I love, or do I want to also expand myself mentally?
Yeah.
I think traveling and living in another country, if anyone can do that, I think I would really advise, because it's reading about, a country is different than going and living there.
And it makes us much nicer people.
I think so. I think it makes us more understanding.
Yeah. So we're nearing the end of our show, and I've listened to all of this. We already spoke a lot about the differences in culture, etc. So I'm going to be slightly naughty here and put you guys to the test. And I think that if you talk about personal development, I think one of the great things I took away from this is that, of course, you set off in life, people give you all sorts of wise lessons, and you have to pick your own and then move on. So if I go, and I could certainly tell you mine, but I'm not going to do it, yours will be far more interesting. What would be the number one lesson that some old wise man or woman gave you in life that you accepted and have benefited you? And what's the one that you should have never listened to or you didn't listen to? And I'm going to ask you the same. So you get thinking time.
Yeah. So for me it's easy, and it's basically the only lesson that I want to give. The only advice that I want to give, advice that I learned myself: live your own life.
Yeah. And did somebody say that to you?
Perhaps not explicitly, but it was what my parents conveyed to me very, very clearly. I reconstructed that after the event, perhaps, but that's basically, but be responsible. Yeah. So live your own life, but it also means that you accept responsibility. And on the second one, I think my attitude there is be open to any advice, but decide yourself which one you want to follow or not.
Feel free to ignore some as well. Yeah.
So, my turn.
Yes, do you have a fun story for us?
Yes, I do. So, advice, I would say that the best advice that I've heard and that I would offer is you should never advise anyone to do something that you don't believe in yourself or that you've done yourself, because there's something unauthentic about that. It might sound glorious, but it's not really authentic. Plus, you're not really being accountable for what might happen with that piece of advice. That's one thing. And I think the other thing is that we need to learn to embrace what we don't know. I think the biggest gap that we face that needs to be bridged is the world that we know and the world that we don't know. And I think in order to do that, we have to also look at doing new things that we've never done before. Yeah. So moving away from a one-size-fits-all formula to really seeing, how can we do things in a new way to fit a new age and a new time. Yeah. So.
And in that way, and by doing that, we can actually contribute much more to the greater part
Absolutely,
of the pie.
I agree.
Thank you so much. Well, I would agree with that. I do hope my son wasn't watching. He gets his lessons all the time. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Connie.
Finally, and this concludes the program about personal development. Thank you for your active contributions, your responses, and of course, thanks to our faculty, Professor Lex Hoogduin, Sujata de Poel, thank you very much. It was very interesting. And please, all of you, note in your agendas, the next live GLOCOMNet panel discussion will take place on February 22nd on storytelling, more stories. See you next time.